Welcome back to the Administering SQL Server 2012 Jumpstart. We are still here. We're still talking. I'm Rich Curry. Mr. SQL in his name, George Squillace. George, what do we got going in this module?
Thank you. Well, you can see from the intro slide here, now up is performance optimization and troubleshooting. Quick little, tracking the trail here. So we first learned how we're going to install the product, make sure it gets put on a good foundation. Then we saw server and database level options that we may set. But you know, Rich, SQL Server is a dynamic environment.
Absolutely.
Lots of things can change moment by moment. So I have kind of a rule of thumb.
What would that be?
We need tools
that
give us facts. But a fact isn't good enough if an airline pilot knew they didn't have enough fuel to get to their destination.
That wouldn't be a good thing.
Not good. So beyond facts, I'm then going to need to make conclusions. I don't have enough fuel. I don't have enough resources for this task. And then finally, I need to do something about it.
Awesome.
So the focus in this particular module is on tools and the facts that they provide. So moving along, we're going to take a look at a general principle, a general definition, locking. We'll see how that ties into blocking, and then how that ties into something particularly negative, deadlocking. We'll look at a couple of other tools, profiler, auditing, and some other tools that relate to performance data capturing.
So what is locking and blocking and deadlocks? What are those all about, George?
Alrighty, so general principle in SQL Server, when data is under modification, picture an eagle with its talons on that particular unit of data, whatever it might be, whether it's a table, an entire row, and a key value. There are ranges of lockable resources, and it's kind of like slapping a hand, making sure that nothing else can touch that data while under modification. In a multi-user database system, locking is natural and expected, and in fact required in order to maintain data integrity.
So locking's a normal operation, happens all the time.
Natural and expected, and we'll see that SQL Server, who wrote the code to do this? Dynamically, SQL Server will shrink and grow lockable resources based on its efficiency rulebook, such as locking just a key value, or locking a whole row or a page, all the way up to very large scale locks. For example, I restore a database, well, the whole database is locked then.
Okay, so SQL Server manages the locking escalation itself.
Thankfully, it does all of it by default. We do have some opportunity to stick our hands in the machinery when we absolutely need to. We won't be looking at that. So next definition then is blocking, which we'll see firsthand in a moment. But for now, blocking occurs when one connection is waiting for other connections to release their locked resources. And in a multi-user database system,
happens all the time.
Some blocking is expected. So at what point does this become out of whack?
Probably when it keeps people from getting the information they need.
Yeah, so excessive blocking is undesirable. And then we take this up even one further notch. We'll also see this in an upcoming demonstration. A deadlock occurs when two connections have locked resources, and now they're seeking each other's resources. And neither connection can terminate until they have each other's resources. As you can imagine, this would produce an infinite loop. SQL Server does something about it, but I can't give away the end of the movie just yet.
And it is a movie, right? Catch-22?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so how do we discover them? How do we solve them?
So we've seen thus far that there are often a number of tools for any particular job, and there's no difference here. We have client error messages that will tell us about deadlock problems specifically. Activity Monitor will tell us about locking and blocking. We have Dynamic Management Objects, a separate topic coming up. We have Profiler, a separate topic coming up. And an area which is getting more and more momentum is extended events. If you want to find out more about extended events, there are some people out in the industry that are particularly excited about those, so there's a reference there. Now, finally, deadlock problems are solved wait, that's not quite accurate.
I was going to say.
You cannot completely solve deadlock problems. Even some deadlocks are just going to occur.
Yep.
But you want to minimize them. So
Okay.
some of the ways that you'd minimize them would be making sure that the stored procedures that access a series of objects access them in the same order. Also, think special operations team. When I say spec ops, think of the Navy SEALs. They get in the cover of darkness, they do their stuff, and they're out of there accomplishing their mission before anybody knows what happened.
Okay.
No jokes, please. Also, we'll find out that to a degree, you can stick your hands in the machinery by setting a connection level setting called the transaction isolation level. And then also, you don't want to be browsing data while it's already under modification, explicit or implicit transaction.
So can we take a look at one of the tools that we might use to find blocking issues, maybe?
Yes, let's take a look at Activity Monitor. We'll have some fun here. Now, you'll notice at the moment, for whatever this is worth, I'm connected to the AdventureWorks database, and AdventureWorks happens to have a table here called person.person. It's got about 20,000 rows, just for giggles, and we'll notice that I am freely able to query this. If I look down, you'll see I have about 20,000 rows.
Okay.
So nothing too dramatic right now, but next I'm going to copy this code. By the way, take a look at the server process ID here.
Okay, process ID 54.
So
Got it.
every connection is assigned, we call it a SPID, server process ID. By the way, a little shout out to SPID. That is the SQL Server, or actually SQL Pass in Detroit, the SQL Pass user group. So I'm from Michigan, so I got to put in a plug for our own little SPID there. We have a great group there. Anyway, yeah, woohoo. So I'm going to create a new query window, paste the same code in here, run it, and what we find is that window by window, I can execute and use the same data at the same time. Nothing dramatic thus far.
So everybody can do everything, no blocking going on.
No blocking at the moment because no data is under modification. So next up, let's make a change. Let's update person.person.
Okay.
And let's see if this would be, as you call it, Rich, a resume, what's the RP? Resume producing event?
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
let's cause a resume producing event, or at least come close.
That typically would be a change that is not a good thing within the database.
And notice my change here. I'm changing all 20,000 contacts to last name Smith without a where clause. Whoopsie.
Okay. That's, capital P.
That's right. It is a collation thing.
Yeah, this database was put in with a collation sequence that's case sensitive.
Yep, thanks for covering my tracks there. And same thing here. This I forgot. Of course, I didn't pre-write out the code for this one, so.
There we go. So the change is going on. It's updating all the records. We got 20,000 records updated, basically.
And to see if it really occurred, let me scroll through a whole bunch of rows here. What do you observe?
It's all Smith.
So I got a whole lot of Smiths, but now let's see what happens if I go to another window and I attempt to access that same data.
Okay, now is it my imagination or did it actually come back already when you did it earlier?
Now, in my other SPID, I should say my original SPID, the one that's holding on to the locked resources, it actually is able to look at that data. That's a special privilege for that particular connection. But what I'm seeing right here reminds me of Ferris Bueller when he's expected to be in class. Bueller. Anyone?
Yep, there we go.
And of course, this data will never be returned until we have the other transaction complete or terminate. And this is where Activity Monitor comes in.
Now, if I were to get a phone call from somebody saying, hey, I've been sitting on this query for a while, how could I figure out what the cause of that block is?
Exactly, and that's where Activity Monitor comes in. So, strangely, they moved it from the user interface in Object Explorer a version or two ago, and now it's just a button up here in the toolbar. So I click on Activity Monitor. We're not going to take the full time to look at all of these areas, but there's just a lot of great information here. We're going to
Okay.
focus on processes. Now, you may remember the original SPID that started to modify data was SPID 54.
I remember that. You asked me what it was.
Excellent. And as I scroll over here, we'll see the head blocker. If I was to expand that, SPID 54 is blocking one other connection. That's what I
Okay.
know from here.
Okay.
Next, if I go to SPID 55, we'll see that it is being blocked by SPID 54. So at this point, Rich, you got your phone call. Hey, what's going on? I'm can't seem to finish whatever I'm trying to do.
Okay.
At this point, one available option to the DBA is to determine which process they might want to kill, or they could, of course, do this in code.
Awesome.
So now I'm going to head back to my original connection, SPID 54, and I will roll back the transaction after I spell it properly. And let's quickly flip over to the other SPID. Observe now, A, I have results, and B, notice all the last names came back.
Yeah,
So
no more Smith.
So Activity Monitor could be a really useful resource to find out why somebody might be blocked at the moment.
And is that the only way that you can get information on what's going on, George? What's one of the other tools that we've got?
We're loaded with tools. And next up, we're going to take a look at Profiler. Profiler is broader than merely locking tracking. Think of Profiler as capturing general kinds of activity that's going on in SQL Server. And in fact, as I move to the topic slide, this is going to introduce us to the topic of tracing, which then will lead us into the topic of what Profiler, and what it does.
Awesome.
So what is tracing? Tracing is the under-the-covers capturing of activity by the SQL Server process, and we'll find that it can record and track all kinds of activity, which we refer to as events that are contained within event classes. So notice the hierarchy from the slide here. I might have one event class, like the locking class, and then the deadlock or blocking events. Another class might be the T-SQL class, and then T-SQL statement begun, T-SQL statement completed would be events.
Okay.
Now, using system stored procedures, I can A, turn tracing on, determine what I want to capture, then perform all aspects related to tracing completely without a user interface. And the link that I have at the bottom of the slide will lead you to a further study there.
Awesome. Is it only through stored procedures? Is there another way that you can get that tracing going?
Well, for some of us who are mere mortals, or at least just exploring, keep in mind there is a graphical user interface into the tracing subsystem. This is a good way to get a head start. Brace yourself, Rich.
Uh-oh.
I've heard of stories from some of my student customers saying that based on being told by Microsoft Product Support Services that they have to turn this on to capture something, that it will generate gigs and gigs of data in no short time or in quick time frame.
Absolutely. The bigger the database, the more the data is going to be generated.
So you'll observe, although the screenshot is a little bit detailed, what you see is a laundry list of captured events, and then when one particular event is selected, you get a lot of detail about it.
Awesome.
So Profiler is a graphical user interface tool. I will add that it adds significant amounts of overhead to the tracing subsystem, which is why the pros like to trace using the system stored procedures.
Which,
So
by the way, there's an easy way to get to, because once you've got your trace configured in the GUI, you can save it and generate the stored procedures from the GUI, from the file menu. on the
Fabulous.
trace.
So I'd like to think of Profiler as a three-legged stool configuration. That's what the graphic is implying here. One of the first things I have to do when I'm configuring trace is determining the particular events in their particular event classes. That is, of course, of major concern, and we'll find out that a template can be used to help us along the way there. There are some pre-made templates. And Rich, knowing that you're overzealous as you are, you can make your own templates, and then readily use those. So after I pick the events and event classes of activity I want to capture, I then may need to go to an extra level of detail in that there are standard columns of information like the start time of an event, the duration of an event, other aspects of what gets captured, but I can add more columns to what gets captured if there's some extra stuff I need to capture. This will make more sense when I do my demo in just a moment. And finally, just a general rule when it comes to capturing data of any kind. Only capture that which you're actually going to bother to look at or that you actually need. And especially, you don't want to have to find a needle in a haystack. And I will promise tracing can create a haystack. Now, we have to have another drum roll.
Uh-oh. Drum roll, please.
Awesome. One of the niftiest things that came about with SQL 2005 is the ability to take Windows performance monitoring data and profiling data and merge them into one screen where I could then capture the basically I could capture data in both environments and happen to see if there's any correlation of system activity to SQL Server activity. Okay. This was brilliant and really nifty, and if you want to see what that might look like, I have a link there. Also, some of you are going to want to take Profiler to the next level, and there's a book, a free ebook that's been put out by SimpleTalk. I think it's Brad McGee. If anybody wants to double check me on that, go to simple-talk.com/books. By the way, I'm big on free stuff.
I think everybody likes free stuff.
Big on free stuff, and SimpleTalk, it's armed by Redgate. Redgate does a great amount for the community. They have a bunch of free ebooks there. So if nothing else, attending this segment, you just got a few $100 worth of free ebooks. So
absolutely.
We're good. Well, next up, let's not hold off any longer. Let's show them how Profiler works.
That sounds like a plan. So what are we going to do here? We're going to go and try and generate a deadlock and see what happens?
Exactly.
Sounds good.
So first up, let me go ahead and configure Profiler to be able to capture the information that I want. Thanks for letting me tidy up for just a little bit. And now I'm going to go to my Start menu. We'll go to All Programs. Yes, SQL Server 2012. But now I'm going to go to Performance Tools, different compartment. And notice, we got both kinds. That's a Blues Brothers reference.
Uh-oh.
We got both kinds. We got Profiler and we got the DTA. So let's open up Profiler.
You realize that's going to go over the heads of a lot of people, myself included.
Yeah, okay. Being an 80s kid, Blues Brothers, you couldn't hardly escape. But
I wish I could say I was an 80s kid.
Yeah.
All right, so we got Profiler coming in.
Now, by virtue of seeing that we have to authenticate, this tells you that Microsoft wouldn't want just anyone, or I should say, you as a DBA wouldn't want just anyone to be profiling and putting a burden on a machine. So after we validate identity, we're going to take a look at the first leg of the stool. So let's just call this, what's today, Wednesday?
Seems like it.
We'll just call this Wednesday AM Trace. Sorry for those that are 12 hours away, but we are glad that you're here. Next up, I can use one of the standard templates, remember.
Those are the ones that choose it for you.
Overzealous Rich might have some of his own on his own machine. Okay. And then I have to determine where I'm going to put the output of the trace. So I can save that to a file. I'll just pick any old location. If this was going to accommodate a large amount of data, then I'm going to have to put that somewhere else, or at least be concerned about where it goes.
Awesome.
So remember, this dictated the events and event classes, which we're now going to see when we go to the next tab here, Event Selection. So the standard template we'll see has picked these particular event classes in bold, and then these particular events in those classes, and then also standard. It's taking a look, whoops, that's nice, you can undo the most recent scribbling. Notice the columns, or I should say the standard columns of information here.
Okay.
Now, I'm going to adjust one of the legs of the stool by saying that I want to show all events, and in particular, observe all of the classes that we have. I don't really want to look at that in super great detail, but I do want to go to the locks area.
Okay.
So from here, I'll pick, let's say, deadlock graph, lock deadlock, and lock deadlock chain. Let's say I have an application and I seem to be getting an inordinate amount of deadlocks, more on the definition part there.
All right.
Okay, next leg of the stool, I get my standard columns, but maybe I want to expose those particular areas that offer other columns. So I might want, let's say, the database ID to be accompanied with the deadlock chain and other ones.
So if there is a column for some events that's not included, but you're filtering on it, will that event show up in the trace or won't it?
Only that which I have selected is going to show up, and not only that, but I can also filter such that events that would normally be captured, they won't go on the trace. And notice, I don't have a huge amount of criteria, but all the ones I would probably want, filter by database that I want to capture, only activity in this database, or all except a particular database. And also on behalf of an application, particular user. So I have a bunch of criteria there. So that is the third leg of the filter, and now I'm going to run my profiler trace. Now on a busy machine, this is just a lightly loaded virtual machine, almost no activity. It's not going to generate a lot quickly.
That's
on a busy
good. We
machine,
won't have to look.
On a busy machine, this would be scrolling and probably going crazy. So next up, let's take a look at some activity, or generate some activity that's going to be captured. And module 2 module 3 deadlock. So let's first go to the market dev database. Sorry, we're already there. And I want you to make a mental note of a couple IDs in particular.
Okay.
So we have two different prospect IDs. So 6800, 7800, they're going to be easy to remember. Now, movie spoiler, two different connections are going to end up requiring each other's resources, never to be finished. This is exactly what a deadlock is.
Okay.
So when when two connections have holds on resources that yet need each other's resources, this would produce an infinite loop of those objects never being released. And we'll have to see what SQL Server does about it. That I won't tell. Now notice, every connection has a SPID, and I can use add@SPID to determine what the SPID is of my particular connection.
All right.
So let's also make a mental note. I'm in SPID 55, and what I want to do is update the first ID in the first connection.
Okay, so we just changed one record.
So I have data under modification. Notice, very sneaky, I did not commit the transaction, so now a lock is held on that resource. All right. Now, for what it's worth, I have a couple different ways of showing locks, SP lock, and later on in the module, we'll look at dynamic management views. So we'll just leave those alone for right now. Okay, next, open up another connection, and I'm going to have to paste the code below into that window.
Okay.
So let me take a look at that. Observe, new SPID, 57. We'll also notice, we can confirm that, that's sort of a duh, but now I want to put the second ID under modification. And it's under modification, also notice I did not commit it.
All right, so we changed one record in the first window, a different record in the second window.
And did not commit either. So notice I'm now back in the first connection.
Okay.
And I'm going to attempt to update the second ID. Now what I'm going to do...
It's kind of sitting there.
Now what I'm going to do, so notice grinding.
Yep.
Now I want to go to the second connection, and I want to attempt to update the first resource.
I see red. Red is not a good thing.
So how is this for one of the world's scariest messages? Well, maybe not the world's scariest, but transaction process blah, blah, blah was deadlocked on locked resources, or unlocked resources with another process, and has been chosen as the deadlocked victim. Here's when you know you're overdue for a vacation. If you know IP addresses of certain machines off the top of your head, you're overdue. And if you have memorized SQL Server error message numbers like 1205,
1205 is every DBA's nightmare.
Rich, it's time to go to the Bahamas then.
Never a good thing. Never a
So
good thing.
let's go back up to Profiler now and see if it found anything. Oh, you know what? Did I run it?
I think you're connected to the wrong database. I have a feeling.
Do you know what? I connected to the wrong one. That was dumb. All right. Well.
Oh, well.
Yep. I needed to connect to
Connected to
ProSware.
AdventureWorks. Well, life goes on. But you know what? The deadlock graph that gets generated does show you all the objects and the statements being executed. So
what do you think? Is it worth it to run this again, or should you want to go on?
I think it's time to get to the next topic.
Well, the drama here is that I would have actually seen in Profiler the deadlocks being listed, and then graphically I would see how they acquired each other or attempted to acquire each other's resources, and in hovering over the deadlock graph elements, I would get useful intel for troubleshooting. So that was really the point of that one.
Awesome. And another technology we've got available to us over and above tracing and Profiler would be auditing. What's that all about, George?
All right, so in the same way that Profiler and tracing can capture data, auditing can capture data too, but for a particularly different sort of purpose. So let's take a look at a number of the auditing techniques, and then we're going to focus on one particular type of auditing feature, which literally has the name
Auditing.
SQL Auditing. Yeah.
I like that.
So in the past, a little legacy, we had some military standards or governmental standards, I guess you would consider those. C2 and common criteria were their names. These were, is implementable a word?
Yeah, it is. It works.
Okay, well, it's a word today. So you could implement those in SQL Server at the expense of lots of overhead. Now, a funny thing about auditing is that you might need to turn auditing on to capture activity, but you don't want the people that you're trying to capture to be able to turn it off.
That would be a good thing,
there are some safeguards there with the auditing features, but it turns out those were they had a lot of overhead and have fallen really out of mind share, at least in the SQL Server community. So we'll consider these as older methods. A lot of overhead associated with those.
All right. What are some of the other ways we can audit the database and catch information?
We have a bunch of different triggers that exist in SQL Server, DML triggers, so we could capture data modifications and then store that or use a trigger to store that in a table. Same thing with modifying database objects, like if I create a table, if I modify a table schema, I have DDL triggers. We have login triggers, but it's good to know that they're there. They fulfill a particular purpose, but there's a trigger limitation.
What's the big limitation?
The limitation is someone can turn it off.
Ooh, that's not a good thing.
So you don't want the person whose traffic you want to capture be the one to turn off, auditing.
That would be like giving the fox the key to the hen house?
Something like that.
Oh, dear.
So next up, let's take a look at the feature SQL Auditing.
Now, this is the one that they want us to use going forward, right?
That's right. So what does this feature provide compared to other types of general auditing methods? It's very granular, similar to some of the previous auditing methods, and we can track not only instance-level auditing activities, but also database-level auditing activities. And it leverages a technology that's now part of SQL Server, extended events, and it's essentially, a pre-configured extended events environment.
Okay.
There's some terminology we're going to go through during the demonstration that you'll have to become familiar with in order to implement auditing. And we'll see the configuration steps. There are actually a series of configuration steps involved in this.
So what do you think? Why don't we just go and walk it through and explain it as we show it to you?
Good plan. All right, so let me close Profiler.
All right, so SQL auditing, again, it allows us to capture event activity similar to what Profiler does, but a little bit different technology.
All right, and here we go. Now, one of the things that we have to determine when we're going to audit is to determine the destination of our audit data. This might be an important concern from an integrity standpoint. We have two destinations of the log data.
And what are those?
We have the application log, and we could also specify a file system location that maybe we exclude access to.
Okay.
So with that, I'm going to create a server audit, create a server audit object. Notice the name of this. We'll call it market dev log and dictate the destination of this.
So we're going to be writing the messages to the application log.
To the application log. Next, I'm going to go to the database level, and I'm going to create an audit specification. Now, there are server level audit specifications and database level audit specifications, and they dictate what it is that I actually want to track or cover. So
Okay.
the code is fairly readable here. I'm creating a database level audit spec. I give it a name, and then on behalf of a particular server, and the activity that I want is any selecting within or activity on the marketing schema objects. And notice whom I'm tracking would be anybody within public, which means everyone.
So you define the action, you define the object, and you define the user that you want to audit.
That's right. So if I wanted, true to really all over the SQL Server product, I have metadata to retrieve any conceivable information that I want. All right, next up, we have to throw a switch on.
Okay.
So pointing to the master database, I have to throw a server level switch on, alter server, audit market dev log, and I have to turn that on. Now that I turn that on, I'm also going to have to turn a switch on at the database level.
Okay.
So point to the proper database, and now that specification that I created a moment ago, I have to turn on as well. And
So
next up, the bear trap.
All right, let's see it, George.
Let's go ahead and perform some activity that may be caught and some activity that might not be caught. Notice a bunch of metadata queries that you can run. I'm going to leave that just in the code here.
Okay.
It was brought up on the break time that some of you are interested in the code, and the code will be made available.
We'll have details coming up a little bit later on how that's
I'm
going to
flattered
work.
that you think some of this code is actually right from Microsoft, and we'll give details on where you could get a hold of that. But yeah. All right, so notice that this object is within marketing, and this object is not within marketing.
Okay.
So I'm going to involve some activity that should be audited.
Interesting.
That's okay. That actually was not activity to be audited. So
Nope.
now we need to take a look at the application log.
So we're going to go out to Event Viewer, look at the application events, see what shows up.
Yep, so let's go to Windows Logs, Application Log. Audit event. Da-da-da-da-da-da.
Very cool. Now you can also get that activity by going to audits in the GUI, correct?
Yeah, in fact, I can configure a lot of, really, for all practical purposes, all of this within the graphical user interface. So all of that is available.
Cool, cool. So there's a lot of information about activity and tracing and all that good stuff. What about getting activity about getting information about configurations and how my databases are set up and things like that? You know, is there stuff that we can learn there?
So SQL Server is a dynamic environment. There are things that are moving, changing all the time. So that's one point. Next point, there are all kinds of facts that I might want to get about my environment, and in increasing measure, there's a recommended way to get that information, and this information is retrieved via catalog views and dynamic management objects. So these are the things that we're going to take a look at in this next little subsection. So I want to start off with a definition, Rich.
Please do.
So what is metadata? Metadata is retrieving information about information.
Okay.
So there are very typical pieces of information that database administrators, maybe even database devs would want to retrieve. Fortunately, Microsoft has laid it in our lap or made it accessible easily through normally queryable objects.
Okay.
Now, I'd like to demonstrate something, so if you guys would flip over to my, my virtual machine for a moment. Let's say, just on a whim here, I create a new database.
Okay.
So let's call this busy database, and immediately, whoops, and immediately we'll go ahead and create it. Now, in my list here, I see my database, and observe when I go to views, I don't have any views, user-defined views.
No, we haven't created anything.
But observe what I have immediately accessible under System Views. Now, for the most part, information schema views, they're queryable objects that they have, but they seem to be falling out of favor. I'll say that's an opinion. What seems to be gaining momentum is this remaining set of objects starting from here and then going downward. Notice the sys prefix. So generically, we're going to call all of these catalog views.
Okay, so the catalog views.
And some of these are queryable objects that get instance level information, something like sys.databases.
Okay.
Or I have other objects that are at the database level, like sys.tables.
Now, the catalog views are mostly static information, though, right?
Exactly. So catalog views are static information, but as I scroll down a little bit further, I'm going to get to some objects that have a different prefix, an added prefix. Notice the sys.dm underscore prefix.
Okay. What does that DM refer to?
So the DM refers to dynamic management object. And if I can flip back, actually, if you guys would flip back to the slides then. Let's go through a quick little classification system. But before we advance, you'll see that having normally queryable objects, our static catalog views, and our dynamic management objects, I can apply all of my normal querying mechanisms to get just the information I want. If I can add a little editorial comment, generally speaking, the catalog views and the dynamic management objects provide way more information that you care about. So you're going to come up with your own custom script code. You're going to use where clauses, column lists. You can aggregate where clauses. Like I said, all the normal queryable mechanisms. You'll come up with your own custom code. Timeout. There are lots of resources out there where they already have some of these queries made, and you can appropriate them rather than write them yourself.
Yeah, it sounds like a plan to me.
All right. I don't know if we'll have enough time at the end of this session, but if there's one of the sessions today where we do have a couple extra minutes, I'll talk about some of my favorite websites that I think you should subscribe to. And I have swallowed my own medicine. I am also a subscriber of every one that I would recommend.
So would be a good thing.
Moving on, you could argue that there are two major classifications of any of the dynamic management objects, that is, those that have the sys.dm underscore prefix. Generally speaking, we call all of them dynamic management objects, or DMOs.
Okay.
Further, those that require no input we refer to as dynamic management views. Okay. And those that require input are called dynamic management functions. Strangely, I can't just look at the name of them and determine, wait, that's a function, that one's a DMV, or dynamic management view.
True.
I've got to put a plug in for Books Online. I know you're a big fan of Books Online.
Best help system ever written.
Every single dynamic management object, probably every catalog object, you can get all the information you want about in Books Online. So that part is good. Now, let's, a point of reality here. So I've stated we have DMOs and then DMVs and DMFs in sort of a hierarchy, and everyone mangles the names.
Yep.
We'll just graciously suffer everyone that doesn't know our taxonomy, sorry, and just roll with it.
There you go.
Now, for those that have particular interest, another Michigan person, an awfully busy man, part of one of the West Michigan user groups, Tim Ford, has co-written a book called, I think it's the Periodic Table of Dynamic Management Objects. So that's a resource you have. And also, being a frequent speaker, conference presenter, he had a presentation that's still out there online. You could easily Google for it here, called the Periodic Table of Dynamic Management Objects. A couple of other resources to run with before we actually take a look at using some of these. At Redgate, one of their free ebooks is called the DMV Starter Pack. Not only an ebook reference, but also a bunch of code that you can use to solve very typical problems about a busy SQL Server environment.
That's a good thing to have.
And then I know at one time Quest, which is now more recently owned by Dell, they had a poster with, I don't know, a whole bunch of dynamic management objects listed on it. But now that you know that there are resources, let's take a look at some of the dynamic management objects and see some of the things that we can obtain from them. So here we go.
So what are we going to be looking at here, George?
So we're going to take a look at really just a strafing run, a big picture survey of some of the dynamic management objects, and we'll have this conclusion. Man, I can get anything. I can find out anything that I would want to. Honestly, you might have to write a little bit of gnarly query code, but you can get what you want. So that's the conclusion you'll have. First, let's take a look at a dynamic management object called sysdm exec requests. Any input required here?
Doesn't look like it to me.
Nope. So this would be classified as a dynamic management view.
Okay.
Now, we'll find that if we scroll one of the columns, and this is good insight into one of those that has an awful lot of columns, somewhere in here we'll find the column is user session or is user process. Heck, off the top of my head, I don't even remember where it is, and I probably passed it anyway.
Yep.
Think I passed it?
Probably.
Okay. So let's take a look. Is user process. Can I skip scrolling?
Yes.
Let's just use a where clause and execute this to only show non-system processes. So I'm using a where clause, is user process equals 1. Next up, we'll find that often it's valuable to combine the use of dynamic management objects. These are also DMVs. So A, we're joining, B, a where clause, and C, we're specifying particular columns. So we're going to use that column to filter the currently executing requests by joining the two tables on session ID. So notice this has revealed me.
There you go.
Next up, note we can also retrieve details of the SQL batch that's being executed instead of just the handle, and we can do this with a function. sys.dmexec SQL text function, and like I said, if you memorize some of the function names or DM objects by name, you need a vacation.
Seeing as there's several hundred of them,
Yeah.
I would agree with you.
So now I'm not only going to perform a join on a couple of DMVs, but then I'm going to outer apply that across a dynamic management function. Let's see what this provides. And we'll see this will supply me, the program name I'm using, the general statement that I'm using, and my actual query code, and a couple of other facts as well. Okay, take a deep breath here, Rich. Now, it says, don't be too concerned about the complexity of the subquery below, but note that it's possible to find the actual statement being executed rather than the batch.
Can I let it out now?
Yeah, there you go. Sorry. All right, good job. All right, so that is somewhat gnarly query code, but as I scroll here, notice I get statement.
Wow.
This would be even more fun, if I expanded that all out.
So you can do a lot of the things that you're doing in Profiler and event tracing and all that through queries as well.
There's so many ways to get information. Part of this might be my preference, and so let's see.
So what about, is extended events similar to Profiler?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Extended events. I've heard a lot about that. Is that similar to Profiler? Are we doing the same kinds of things there?
I saw a comment from the student or from the attendee pool there. Extended events are not going to be part of this session. They're not in detail really at all on the exam. So we're only looking at Profiler for this point. Yep, Profiler is a deprecated feature. That means here's my nickname for a deprecated event. It's a dead man walking. It's going to be going away. It's not gone now, but it's going to be going away. In some cases, we're not even told in how many versions it'll go away, but it's going away.
So extended events is there. It does the same kind of functionality, but at this point, it's not really a big objective on the exams, and Profiler's not going away anytime in the short term.
That's right.
All right.
Okay, so next up, one of the things that you might be interested in is a precious resource, and that is the procedure cache. So I'm able to query, let's just summarize, all the points of interest. So I can get plan cache details. I can find the top 10 executing queries. Lots of good stuff here. Like I said, there are places out there that will give me, that will hand me this code in my lap and can help me solve various problems. So let's go ahead and move along now.
All right. So the other thing, we've got these dynamic management objects, we've got the catalog views, we've got Profiler and all that. Is there a technology that kind of brings all that together and pulls it into a way that it becomes useful for us over time?
Especially. There's the D in dynamic management objects, which describes that it's dynamic information. It's changing information. It's not persisted in any way, which brings us to our next topic. Might it be wonderful, by the way, this is where you say yes.
Yes.
Might it be wonderful if I could capture some of that performance data and some of that tracking data, store it long term, maybe even be able to create some wonderful reports off of it? Of course, the answer is yes. General troubleshooting rule. If I don't know what normal is, how can I take my current condition and determine if something's wrong or not? Have you ever had a he said, she said, some kind of thing?
Yep.
So let's take a look at the management data warehouse.
Cool.
All right, now the management data warehouse is a regular SQL Server database that I can make that has some other mechanisms placed on it to grab data from either the current instance and or other instances.
Okay.
It's configured through a wizard. Actually, I haven't looked into seeing if I can configure it in code, but I configure it and set it up with two different wizards. What it ends up doing is setting up schedules, SSIS packages, and jobs to grab performance data, put it in what they call the management data warehouse, and also build some wonderfully accessible reports that are viewable from Management Studio.
Very
nifty.
cool.
I know
Very cool. How do you set that up? How do you get Data Collector up and working?
So as you can see from this slide, there are two wizards that you'll invoke. First, I have to get started. I have to create the management data warehouse, and you'll see that from the first radio button, implying that I'm going to run the first wizard. After that, I then set up data collection and do the rest of the configuration process, and you'll see in going through these two wizards, two sets of roles exist. There's a role for management, and notice there are three different roles, each with their own privileges, and then there are specific database roles for configuration purposes.
So once you've got the data collector set up, you've set up the management data warehouse, what's the next step?
Next is allowing it to do its work through the scheduled jobs, and you'll see a couple of two of the three reports that can be produced. Let me ask a rhetorical question.
Ask away.
If there were resources on a SQL Server system that you were concerned about, what would be some of the ones you'd be most concerned about?
Probably disk space.
Disk space.
Maybe memory or CPU utilization. I mean, those are the things that get used on a computer.
Sure, and if you guys will go back to the slide, you'll take a look that, at least on behalf of these two reports, they show exactly what you were talking about, Rich. Those things like disk usage trends, CPU usage, memory, etc. Some really good stuff.
So can we take a look at how to set it all up and get it going, George?
Sure.
So walking through, you're going to show us the wizards and how it all comes together. And at the end of the day, hopefully, we have a data collector.
That's right. So you'll notice from here under management, let me just collapse a little bit to simplify the user interface. So under management, you'll notice I have data collection, and if I refresh, well, I don't have anything there right now. General rule of thumb in Windows, when in doubt, yep, I'm going to right-click. So right-click, configure the management data warehouse. Well, here are my two radio buttons. Let's get started with the first one. So first up, what instance do I want to put the warehouse on, and do I already have a warehouse, or do I want to make one? It probably wouldn't be a bad idea to already create one ahead of time, but skipping a little of the detail, let me go ahead and make the management data warehouse.
And that's just a standard create database dialog.
Standard database. So here is where I could map logins and users to the management roles. I don't need to do any of that just yet. And from here, I can click on not Swedish, but Finnish.
That would be the collective groan from the peanut gallery, please.
So if I didn't get beat up enough on the last break for my comic book reference.
Keep going.
Next up, we'll run the wizard again, set up data collection. So enter where you want to cache collected data locally before it's uploaded.
Okay.
I'll just pick a dummy location for right now. In reality, you would probably want to pick a location that you're going to have enough space for. So let's go ahead and designate the server and database that will host the data warehouse.
All right.
And honestly, I thought I put that on Prosware, but maybe I put it on the default instance.
AdventureWorks, yep.
Yeah. Okay. So there's our warehouse. It's always nice having a second set of eyes. So let's click on Finish.
And the wizard does its wonderful thing. It spins, it grins, it winds, it dines, it slices, it dices, and it's done.
And now, what we would want to do is generate some activity, give some time to let the scheduled jobs work to collect data, and then we get the nifty reports. So right-click on Data Collection Reports, and there are the three very pretty reports.
Awesome. Very cool.
Those are the basics of configuring the data warehouse. So in this module, we took a look at SQL Server being a dynamic environment, lots of ways that are lots of tools that we have that can give facts. Facts can produce conclusions, and from the conclusions, we can then implement some changes.
Awesome. So thanks a lot, George. We will be taking a meal break now. We appreciate the time you've spent and look forward to seeing you back here at the top of the hour.
And I got to tell you, I'm excited about some of the stuff we're going to look at this afternoon.
Oh, yeah, we're going to have fun. We're going to have fun. See you in a bit.